Everybody, Lee and Jim here with LG Speed and Custom, and welcome to part 2 of Andrew's 56 Chevy. In this video, we are going to be installing a Heidts independent front suspension with power steering and power disc brakes. First thing that we're going to do is pull this front sheet metal off, and that way we've got access to the whole front suspension. We'll probably end up pulling the engine out as well, just because we're going to have to weld a new cross member and make some motor mounts. So we'll get the sheet metal off and then dive into it. Jim's got the front sheet metal all off. Next up, we're going to take this front suspension out, which is undoing the leaf spring shackles here. Back here, we're going to be removing this steering box. This is an aftermarket power steering assembly that somebody has put in at one time. So we're going to save all this stuff because this is great stuff for somebody that's building a 55 to 59 Chevy and kind of wants to keep it more traditional. We've got, I think these are drop leaf springs in the front. We got a big honking sway bar that's going to come off, undo the shocks and the brake lines, and then this front suspension should roll out of here. We're getting a little congested in here. I've got Jonathan's 47 Ford apart over there. But our kind of plan is by the time I'm getting that finished up, Jim will be getting this front suspension out, and then we can just roll my Roadster back and move everything out all at once. Jim's inside right now taking the low car shifter assembly out, and that way we can get the whole engine and transmission out in one shot. So the first thing that we did was we measure here, 3 degrees. The engine is sitting on a 3-degree angle right now, and the reason we need that measurement is because when we pull this engine and transmission out, we're not going to be putting this cross member back in. We have to build our own motor mounts. So we need to know what angle the engine was so that when we build our new mounts, we can build it at the same angle. I am currently bolting this across where the rad support used to go. Before I bolt this down, or it doesn't have to be before, but I'm going to get a measurement from there to there as well and just record it in my notes, because we're going to be taking this cross member out. Once this cross member is out and that engine cross member is out, there's nothing holding these front frame rails in place anymore. So by bolting this down, if you guys might remember this is used to be across the back of my 32 chassis when it was on the rotisserie, repurposing this piece yet again. So by bolting that down, when we take those cross members out, the frame rails can't go like boing and spread open or move around. They're going to stay where they were, and we want them to stay where they are because that's where the rad support bolts on. And if these get a little bit wide, the rad support's not going to bolt on anymore. Not to mention it's going to throw all the geometry out on the front end. So it's very important to keep that steady. When you're doing suspension stuff like this, it is, you want to measure everything before you take it apart. Even if it's, you don't use any of those measurements when you put them back together, it's better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have them. At least that's what Jim always says.
That's right.
Yesterday, I told you guys I was putting this bar in, and 32 seconds after I said that, I realized that when I put this bar in, it's just going to be in the way when we lift the engine and transmission out. So now that the engine and transmission's out, I can go ahead and put this bar in to hold our frame horns in place. Jim's pulling that power steering box out now that there's not an engine in the way, and then we can start getting this front cross member out of here, which has like 130 rivets. That'll be fun. And we'll probably just cut it in half and then we can take it out one side at a time. We just did this on Zach Wilson's 55 Chevy pickup, which was basically the exact same thing. And on the instructions from Heidts, it says that you just have to clearance this away to get the steering rack to fit in there. But by the time we whittled this away to get the steering rack in there, half of it was gone anyways, and it was probably faster just to completely remove it. So that's what we're going to do on this one. Oh, this e-brake assembly's got to come out of here too. One of you guys can do that. Because we're putting a fuel cell in this truck, I'm just going to take the fuel line right out. Before we do that, I'm going to drain the tank. You know who can drink 5 gallons of gas and still feel okay? Jerry can. Well, now that we've got the gas tank drained and the shop's all full of gas fumes, we're going to fire up the torch to start cutting some rivets out. Actually, we drained the gas tank, probably an hour and a half ago. We've had lunch. Doesn't smell like gas in here. All the gas is gone. But we're still going to fire the torch up and cut some rivets out because GM really, really, really likes rivets. There's a lot of rivets on this front end. So we're going to cut the heads off with the torch, and then Jim's going to come along behind with the air hammer and blast them out of there. And then this front cross member will cut the big chunk out and then knock the rest of the rivets out just to make it a little more manageable. All right, fire time. All right, we've got the front cross member, the original front cross member cut out. We've got the shock mounts removed, the old e-brake system removed. We're ready to start fitting the front end. So here's the Heidts front end. This is what they give you this is the cross member kit. We've got 2 boxing plates that will fit in there somewhere. We're going to have to fold this little flange right here. This was folded up for the original steering box. We're going to have to fold that down and trim that. I can't remember if we got to fold this up and trim it or not. I'll double check on that. Once these boxing plates are fit, we've got this front cross member here. This slides up from the bottom, and the frame rail sits right in here. Kind of like, I don't know if I can do this with one hand. It's a little bit heavy. So yeah, it doesn't quite fit right now. We're gonna have to look into that to see what that's all about. but I'm not too worried. We'll make it fit. Then we've got, these are called the Heidts. We got a left side and a right side. We're gonna test fit the, wait, left side's over here. Let's get this boxing plate out of the way. And they sit just like that. They weld in. And that's where your upper control arm mounts to. This is where your shock mounts to. The coil mounts on the inside there. This cross member down here, the one that sits up from the bottom, this is where your lower control arm attaches to. And then up front here, we've got our steering rack. We also have these two little guys. These are just little half pieces of pipe. And they go in here, and that just gives the steering rack a little bit of room. The steering rack would hit the frame otherwise, so that's what we're gonna do now. Start fitting this thing. You just watched me heat that flange up with the torch, and then I folded it over nice and flat. Then I wire wheeled and hit the frame with a DA sander. It cleaned up so nice. Most of this, like, this is all original black paint on this frame still. This truck is in amazing condition. So now that I got the frame all cleaned up, this flange that I folded over, I just put a little piece of masking tape on there so that I can draw on it with something like a pencil or a pen that's nice and fine. So we're gonna line, the frame kind of has a little dip right here. If we look at the other side, where that dip is, from there back, it is perfectly straight. So we're gonna take this straight edge here and line it up flush with the rail back here, and then flush with this end right here, and you can see how much of that flange needs to get trimmed off. So I'll hold this down. Let me get my camera holder here. So we've got this straight edge flush with the rails back here and flush with the rail up here. I'm going to take this pen and make our mark. That's where we need to trim this rail, cut it up to this line, and then we'll have a nice flat edge to fit our boxing plate against. I'll probably just use a zip disc and then finish it off just with the flapper wheel. Well, I don't know how to say this diplomatically, so I'm just gonna say it. This Heidts front end kit kind of sucks. It doesn't fit very nice. When I put this same kit in Zach Wilson's 55 Chevy truck, that was last summer when I did that. I followed the steps as they're written. Step 1, you know, cut everything out. Step 2, fit your boxing plate. Step 3, fit the cross member. I got to step 3, fit the cross member, and it was like a 1/4 inch too narrow. So I just made 1/8 inch spacers to go on each side, which, you know, you shouldn't really have to do, but we made it work. I just thought, you know, maybe there was something funky on Zach's frame. He brought us just the bare frame, so we had nothing to like compare it off of. But now I'm on Andrew's 56 and I have the same issue. Let me show you what's going on here. So according to the directions, if you measure from the center of the spring shackle back 20 7/8 of an inch, gives you your axle center line. So I've got our axle center line on here, top and bottom. That is where the center of this cross member goes. So I've marked the center. The center, by the way, on the bottom does not mean the center on the top. This has a kickback to it. So I got it marked. Oh gosh. I got it marked centered on the bottom. So I line that up in there, fit our boxing plates, and once again, they're too narrow. So here's what we've got. With this plate sitting up there and this plate sitting up here, our top width is 29 and 5/16. Our bottom from here to here is 29 and 7/16, which means these are tapered in. Which is a little bit weird because when you fit this up from the bottom, like you think you would have it come up square, like you'd want your boxing plates square, which is how I did them on Zach's truck. And that's probably why it got weird. So the other thing that is weird on this is these boxing plates, you are supposed to fit on the inside. Yeah, we'll fit them on the inside here, line up our axle center lines, and when we have this sitting flat against the frame, like it says to do in the instructions, it sucks it in way more, which is why I had to put spacers on Zach's. So this should be sitting like that, which leaves this huge gap in here. The bottom, we're gonna have to notch out this little area right here. That's the width of the cross member. We're gonna have to notch that out so that it will slide up in there. And we want our bottom measurement when these are welded in there. We want 29 and 7/16. So if we take our 29 and 7/16, which is 29.4375, and then get our measurement from this edge to this edge, was 28 and 3/16. Minus that gives us 1.25, an inch and a quarter. So that's how much we need to widen that, inch and a quarter. Divided by 2, because we have to split the difference, half on one side, half on the other side. So divided by 2 gives us 0.625, which is 5/8 of an inch. So we're gonna measure in 5/8 of an inch from our center line, squared, and notch that out on both sides. Then I'm gonna take my boxing plate and I'm gonna fit it to that notch and square it up this way so that we don't have to put that gap in. And wherever it sits up here, it's gonna sit, and then I think we'll just build a filler piece to go in there to box it properly. So we're gonna make it work. We can make this work. But I have to say, it's like, why wouldn't you just make it the right dimension? Like make your boxing plates fit. I think would be a lot easier. I've only installed 2 of these Heidts kits, one on Zach's truck and then this one on Andrew's truck. And we both had this issue. I've installed a lot of TCI kits, like total cost involved, and they fit so nice. I've never ever had an issue with those. Now, that being said, I've never installed a TCI front end in one of these trucks, so maybe it's just the way these trucks are. The TCI kit might fit just as shitty in this truck as it does, as this Heidts kit does. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We'll make our way through it. It's just annoying when you buy a kit that's like supposed to be purpose-built for a vehicle and it doesn't fit. I just marked our inside mark, so we're gonna cut this little notch out on both sides. better. And I'm doing this a little bit backwards here. I have notched the bottom frame rails. In case you didn't pick up, I forgot to mention it earlier, the bottom frame rails are wider than the top of the frame rails. So I've notched the bottom and I've got this cross member sitting in there exactly where it needs to be. It is squared up. It is front to back the same, side to sides the same. That's where it goes. Now, instead of building boxing plates and then fitting the cross members fit. And I think I'm going to modify the boxing plates to fit. So that one should sit right there. You know what almost might be easier is these boxing plates are 3/16. I bet you if I made some at 1/4 inch, that would fix, you know, almost all of it, like at least to about there. And then, I don't know, if we welded it, like it fits nice on the bottom, that's good. If this was made out of 1/4 inch, it would fit nice to about there. Our gap from there to there is probably fine to fill. So maybe, you know, weld that. And then this big gap on the end, if we have it welded not there, if we weld it up here, and then maybe take a C-clamp and pull that over, I think would probably be fine. Let's test the other side. Make sure it's happy. And that concept is going to work on this side. Yeah, I think it will. It is a little bit tighter on this side. These frame rails might not be exactly the same, but I mean, it's really close. So I think that might work. I've got the 1/4 inch boxing plates cut out and put in there, and that cleaned this gap up a lot better. When I made these, I also made them a tiny bit shorter. The original boxing plates used to stick up above the frame. These ones are slightly smaller than the frame so that we've got, you know, that valley to weld in, the same as we did on when we did the C-notch on the back. So I think now that I've got this sitting in here, I'm going to tack it in place, pull the jack out, and then probably start welding everything except for this front part. I'm going to weld this right here, and then hopefully, like, I'll weld all this and then do this weld, and hopefully there's enough heat in there that I can take a C-clamp and just kind of pull that over. It's got to come over like, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch at the far end here. So I'll suck that over and then weld that up along that edge. We can do the same thing on this side. All right, we got tons of heat in there. Let's see if this will pull over. I think it's gonna work. Okay, well, it didn't pull it as tight as I was hoping, but it's definitely tight enough that we can fill that with Miller. Fill her with Miller. This thing is all welded up now. It turned out really good. I'm super happy with it. Over here, I don't know if anyone noticed when I was cutting those rivets out with the torch, I got a little carried away and nicked the frame a little bit. So we're gonna weld those up now. I have just clamped a piece of brass to the bottom of this, and the reason I clamp brass to it is because weld does not stick to brass. So now I can go and just pour the weld in there and not have to worry about it like blowing through to the other side or have the backside look like a bunch of like little porcupine quills. We can just fill that with weld, undo our vice grips, and it'll be a relatively nice clean finish on the backside. For those that watch the build on my 32 Ford, I did this in a lot of spots on that chassis that had a similar thing from previous repairs. I should probably turn the gas back on.
Whoops.
Take two. We've got the main cross member all welded in there. So now we can fit our hats. The hats, according to our instruction book, you make a mark here. And then that mark is in line with the front of the cross member. From there, we measure 1 3/4 inch forward, and that's where that sits. And it just sits in there like so. Hold it nice and tight up against the frame and weld it in place. So we got our mark there. We'll go, there's 1 1/2, 1 3/4 inch. Make our mark. Now the one kind of weird part about this happened on Zach's truck as well, is it covers up half your serial number. So what I'm going to do is write the serial number down over here, and then we can stamp it in again. Yeah, okay. So we've got our mark there. We'll slide that in place. That looks good. Okay, let's grab the welder and tack it in there. Right about there. All right, let's weld that in. Got the other hat welded on. Worked out really nice. So what I did when I was welding this back edge is I weaved from the hat into the frame rail and the boxing plate and kind of just went back and forth, bridging all three of those guys together. So it's 5 o'clock, which means it's technically quitting time. So that's a good stopping point right now. Tomorrow, we are going to fit the steering rack. We got to put those C-notches in for the steering rack to fit through, and then we can start building some engine mounts and put this thing back together. All right, so it's the next day. We are fitting these C-notches for the steering rack, and that is because the rack sits higher in the frame than the frame will allow, so we got to make a little notch there for the rack to slide through. According to the instructions, if we go off our center line, 5 inches forward is where we want to go for a power rack. A manual rack is a different measurement. I think it's 4 3/4 or something. Don't quote me on that, read your instructions. So we went 5 inches, and that's our center line. This is like 4-inch diameter across, so I measured 2 inches out and 2 inches out. Held a plate flush with the bottom of the frame, set this guy on the plate, and traced it. So now we got to cut this out on both sides. and weld this in. While I'm doing that, Jim, I don't know where Jim went, but Jim he's getting the rack ready to go in. So it needs extensions put on here. I can't remember how wide they were. They're in here somewhere. No idea what he did with them, but they basically thread them on here and it just moves the outer tie rod further out so that it lines up with the spindle properly. There they are right there. He had them in his hand the whole time. The little C-notches here are all welded in. Basically all our fabrication now is done except for the motor mount. So we can pull this cross member back out again. Gonna pick up the engine and transmission with the forklift and bring it back in and start setting it in place. We're gonna get it squared up and on our 3-degree angle again, and then we can start building some mounts. Jim's got this rack all straightened out. So when we did Zach's, he had extensions that threaded on the end here that just moved the tie rod out. This one was a little bit different. Jim had to take these boots off and actually take this whole assembly off, and the extensions went in here instead. I don't know what the advantage of that is or the disadvantage is, but you know, essentially it does the same thing. It just moves this further out because you want that. You need this to be in line with your spindle. And in a perfect world, you know, this pivot's in here. That pivot point should be at the same pivot point as your lower control arm. If it's not, you're gonna get some bump steer. With that all done, he has started prepping all these control arms. He's taken them out of the box, wiped them all down with some wax and grease remover, gave them a quick little scuff with a Scotch-Brite, and we're gonna paint them black. The engine's sitting in place right now. Our transmission cross member at the back, we never moved. So we just set the transmission back where it's supposed to go. Jim put a couple bolts in, and then I used the floor jack underneath the oil pan to lift this side of the engine and manipulate it back and forth and up and down until we got it centered in here. I went off the center of the crank bolt here to each side to get it lined up this way. Now remember, we needed this sitting at 3 degrees. So I set it at 3 degrees. Came over here, started looking at how we're going to build a motor mount, and I thought to myself, you know, the steering is in here. We better fit the steering rack before we build our motor mount so that we don't build a motor mount right in the way of where the steering's going to be. While we were doing that, or while I was fitting the steering rack, I realized that when the engine was sitting at 3 degrees, the harmonic balancer was, like, the rack wouldn't even go in because it was going to hit the harmonic balancer. So I've lifted it up, the engine up high enough that we can get the rack in, but our 3 degrees is slightly off. Not much, just a little bit. Looking underneath though, at the top of the transmission, probably can't see it in there, but we've got room for the transmission to go up a little bit. Like we could take where the bolts are, where the mount is, we could put like even a couple flat washers in there or a little shim would tilt the motor forward and we can get our 3 degrees again. So I'm pretty confident that it's going to be okay where it's at now. Let's start designing our motor mounts. We just have to kind of go from here to here somehow. So to build these motor mounts, after we got the motor level and sitting where we wanted, the first thing I did was cut a little piece of tubing that this bolt slides through, and then I put it in the rubber mount bolted to the engine. From there, I built a cardboard template that fits from there over to the frame rail. From there, I cut that out of some 3/16 plate, and that sits in there like that. Now we're going to tack this in place and then build a gusset. For our gusset, we want to be mindful of the steering, so I've pre-fit the steering U-joint on here to make sure that we're going to have good clearance for that. I've also, I don't know if I mentioned, we got the headers on now. Andrew doesn't want to run the Ram's Horn manifolds anymore, so we've put the headers on just to make sure that they're not going to interfere with the steering or the motor mounts, and it doesn't look like they are. So I've just cut a 2-inch piece of construction paper here. And we're basically, let's get in here where you guys can see. It's kind of hard to see, but we're going to go from the cross member right here up to the top of the motor mount up here. So by putting the paper in there, I can now go from underneath with a pen and mark our triangle. And same with this way, I can just come along here and mark where, not our triangle, but like where our line's going to be to get the angle. Kind of like that. And then we're on the back side now. There we go, we got our gusset. So here's our template. We can take this over to the computer now, draw it up, and cut it out. I put a little speed hole in it just for fun. There, it fits in there just like that. Sorry, these power steering hoses kind of make it a bit hard to see, but you get the idea. So we'll tack that in and do the same thing on the other side. We've got both gussets are in there now on both sides. So our next step is to pull this back out, and then we can final weld all that stuff up. While it's out, we're going to trim this cross member. There used to be a cross member that went all the way across from whatever engine was originally in this. I'm assuming a inline 6. And these headers that Andrew got, this side doesn't, it won't even go on because of that. And the one on this side here, you can see we're gonna have header clearance issues when it's time to put the tailpipe on, or the downpipe. Not a big deal though, we can cut those out. They're not even being used anymore. We'll pull this all apart, get the rack out of there, weld everything up, and then we can give this a coat of paint and put it back together for good. Motor mounts are all welded up. The last little bits of that cross member are cut out. So tomorrow we'll paint this and then it can start going together for good. Morning. It's Monday morning. Jim painted all this, did a marvelous job on it. It's just fantastic. So we're gonna start putting it all back together now. Well, we were painting the front. We had some leftover paint. Jim had some leftover time, so he painted the back. So we're gonna put the shocks on the back now. Then the box that's sitting right outside on the forklift still, we can put it back on and then use the forklift to put this engine back in. I want to point out that when I was filming the other day, I made these little gussets for the back, or the front, but I also made some for the back. I didn't have that on camera though, but we've got gussets on both sides of that. So that was kind of an afterthought. The Transdap motor mounts, which I kind of based these off of, they only have the one gusset. So that's why I only put one gusset on. But then I thought, you know what? We should probably put two gussets on. It'll take not quite 35 seconds, but it took like 35 minutes. And now we got gussets on both sides. We got the engine in there, so now we can start assembling all of this. We've got our lower control arms, upper control arms. I think this one might actually be for that side. They might be side for side, so just ignore that. But lower control arm, upper control arm, spindles. We've got all our control arm hardware. These are for the little T-bolts for the top here. And we got these long guys right here. They go from there to there, through here. Spindles obviously go on there. We've got all our rubber boots and everything that go on here. Steering rack, which we've already had mocked up in there once before, so that should be fine. And then we've got some coilovers, which I've never put coilovers on a Mustang 2 front end before. I've done coil springs and airbags. So this is new for me, but I'm pretty sure it'll be pretty straightforward. Looks like this guy right here will go through the top where the shock would normally go. And then this little heim joint here probably goes through here where the shock would normally bolt into the bottom. Pretty straightforward. So what are we going to start with first? Maybe we'll just start with the rack and get it out of the way. Let me just shove that guy up in there. I just put a little bit of grease on the top of the coil and the bushing here. And we can slide that through. Put a little bit of grease on this side. That goes on. And we got our washer. And then our nut. And looks like a spacer goes on this side. And another spacer on this side. Maybe. There we go. Just got to hold your tongue right. And then that just threads in like that. Does that go on the end? Maybe it does. We've got this guy left over. I don't know where it goes. Okay. It might go on the end, it might not, I don't know. Okay, that spacer does not go on the end. I'm not sure what it's all about. So I took the bolt back out and I just put a lock washer on the end. And I'm gonna put a little bit of Loctite. Oh, is this thing stuck? There we go. I'm gonna put a little bit of Loctite on this end and put it back together. No idea what that spacer's all about. The instructions that are with this kit are different than the parts that we actually have, which seems to be a common theme with this front end. So we'll snug this guy up. And the bottom is done. So I know I just said not to tighten them all up until it's all together, but this one doesn't have any bushings or anything in it, so it is okay the way it is. The top is still loose. This guy's still loose. I think we can fit the spindle and the upper control arm now. Upper control arm first. It uses, way over here, some T-bolts. These slide in the hats that we just welded on, and then you turn them, and they poke up like that. Pretty simple. Okay, so up top here, we've got these little slots like this, and this T-bolt. Whoops, I went all the way through. Let's try that again and maybe hit it a little more gentle. There we go. So you put it in and then you turn it sideways. Then we can take our control arm, upper control arm. This is ridiculous. Okay, let's put a nut on that guy so it stays. Put this one in one more time. Turn it sideways. There we go. I'll put the, oh, come on. Okay. Round, what is this, 4, 5, 6? Okay, that is on now. So these slide back and forth, and you can put shims to raise them and lower them, and that's how you set your adjustment. You slide it all the way in, you're gonna have negative camber. You slide them all the way out, you're gonna have positive camber. Put a bunch of shims under this side so it goes like that, and that's gonna give you some caster. So that's all set up for the alignment shop. For now, I'm gonna just kind of put it in the middle and put it together, and then we can let the alignment shop do the rest. Okay, spindle time. So the ball joints are already installed on these control arms. So slide that guy up. One of these washers. Put our castle nut on. And then this slides down onto our lower control arm. Washer and castle nut. Then probably hook our steering up here too. Cool, man. Where'd our castle nut for that go? There it is. Okay, I think that's the front suspension done. Now we can tighten it all up. Put our spindle on, or our hub. Spindle's already on. We'll put the hub on and the calipers. Probably put the other side together first. Found where that spacer goes. It goes right here on the lower ball joint. I don't know why it was in the same box as the coilover part. All right, our driver's side is all together now. I got the floor jack under it and lifted it up until it just started to take the weight off the jack stand. So now we can tighten up our lower control arm here. And probably do this guy at the same time. What is that, a 9/16? Yeah. Cool. So these Mustang 2 style front ends, when the truck is fully, like all the weight is on the suspension's fully loaded, this lower control arm is supposed to be parallel with the ground. And I think we're pretty close right now. We might have to adjust it a little bit as, like, we still have all the front sheet metal's got to go on, the front bumper, the radiator, all the coolant and stuff. So it might come down a little bit more, probably will. But because this is an adjustable coilover, all we got to do is thread this guy and it will raise our suspension up. So I'm not too worried about that. Got all our cotter pins in. Like I mentioned earlier, that mysterious spacer goes on in between the nut, the castle nut, and the spindle on the lower ball joint. So I think the front end is pretty much assembled now. We just got brakes. Jim's working on the brakes right now. He's got this side all together. Pretty straightforward. We just got a bracket here that bolts to the caliper. I think that's what he's working on right now. So yeah, that bracket bolts to the spindle, and that's what the caliper attaches to. And then the rotor, it just goes on like a regular old rotor. Pack your wheel bearings, put your wheel seal on the back, splopper on, and away you go. Calipers mount on the back like that. While he's been doing that, I got the power steering routed on here. It was actually really easy to do. So this rack, when the kit that it came with adapters to go from whatever metric threads it is to a -6 AN fitting. And the power steering system that used to be in this truck, the hoses were already on -6 fittings. So it was literally a plug and play deal. I just took the hydraulic fittings apart a little bit, as you can see from the mess underneath, shortened them up a little bit, and put them back together. So the power steering is done. All what's really left now is to hook up the steering. We're waiting on parts to arrive for that. Today is Tuesday, and they're supposed to be here for Friday. But we're going to have a bearing that goes in the end here to stop this from flopping around. Then just a 3/4 inch U-joint to a 3/4 inch shaft. That's going to go down here to another 3/4 inch U-joint to a 36 spline. I don't know if I can get that off. There we go. A little 36 spline shaft on the end there. So once those parts arrive, we can finish that up, and that's basically it for this front end. Our steering parts have finally arrived. We have a 3/4 inch double D shaft, meaning that it makes a D shape this way and a D shape that way, and this is 3/4 inch diameter. So this U-joint is 3/4 inch double D on each side. This U-joint is 3/4 inch double D on one side and a 36 spline shaft on the other side. The steering rack has a 36 spline. This is our double D shaft. You can buy these in various lengths. I think this is the shortest one you can get, and it is 2 feet long. So this is what we're going to build our steering out of. Let me show you what's happening here. So over on the truck here, down there like we just went over, we got our 36 spline shaft there, so that 36 spline U-joint fits on there. And then this truck, because this truck already had an aftermarket power steering system in it, somebody has already replaced this shaft with a 3/4 inch double D. Usually what I do, if this was an original column that got cut off from the steering box, is they are just like usually a solid 3/4 inch shaft, and I will just take a grinder and grind this into a double D shape. The end of the steering column, I've pressed a bearing in here, and I've got a muffler clamp holding it right now, but you know, I don't even think it's necessary. I think we can probably just completely get rid of that, because that's a pretty tight fit. Like, I had to use a hammer to get that in there. And when the U-joint goes on the end, I mean, it can't really go anywhere anyway, so we'll probably just get rid of this because it's kind of ugly looking. So these U-joints have set screws in them. There's usually 2 on each side. When I put it together for good, I will Loctite those in there, but for now we just need to mock it up so that we can get a measurement for how long our shaft needs to be. So we'll clamp that guy on there, and you can see how nice That moves around. We'll grab our far end down here. This is the, uh-oh, I didn't need that anyways. This is our 36 spline one. So it will go on there, and there's a little groove in the shaft that set screw kind of sits in to position it so that it's not too far down or too far up. Okay, that is in there. So now if we take our tape measure, and I'm going to measure from this line right here, like where the shaft would end, to the same point on the other shaft in here. And that will give us 12 inches. So we'll take our double D shaft that's on the bench there and cut that down to 12 inches, and it should fit in there. We've got our steering shaft in here now. So I don't know how many of you guys noticed on the steering shaft that comes out of the column, there's a hole drilled in there. That's for this set screw. So what we're gonna do now that we've got this kind of like sitting in place where it needs to be is one by one, I'm gonna take the set screw out, and then I've taken a drill bit, wrapped a little bit of tape around the sides so that we don't gull the threads. And I'm going to go through, take the set screw out and go through the hole and drill into the double D shaft. Now some people will drill a hole all the way through. I've always just drilled a dimple, just so that we just need that set screw to like sit in there, and then when we Loctite it in there, it allows it so that it can't really ever wiggle around. Not that it, like, I mean, once it's in there, it can't even really go anywhere. In theory, you could not tighten this at all and it won't come apart. But just to be on the safe side, because it is steering, we're gonna dimple and Loctite those set screws in just to hold it nice and secure. Let's see if this works. Oh yeah, that's nice and smooth. No binding or anything. Cool, I think the steering is done. Kind of, almost. One thing I forgot to mention when we did the power steering lines. This is a Chevy power steering pump. This is a Ford power steering rack. I think these racks are actually from like a late 80s Thunderbird. So these racks are supposed to have, I think, like 800 to 1,000 PSI to go through them, and I think these Chevy pumps put out like closer to 1,200 to 1,500 PSI. And what happens, don't quote me on those numbers, but it's in that ballpark. And what happens when they have too much PSI is it makes the steering really sensitive and really twitchy. So what you do is there's this kit that you can buy. Borgeson makes it, I think Flaming River makes it, a few other people make it. And you take the fitting out of the back of the pump, and there's shims that you put in there, and each shim you add drops the pressure down a little bit. So I have not done that yet because I completely forgot all about it until like a couple days ago. So I ordered the kit. It's not here yet, but I mean, I don't know if we probably won't cover that in this video, but maybe when we're doing the next video on the brake system, if it shows up in time, I'll show you guys how to put that in. The only other thing left to do that we're also not going to do right now is the inner fenders will have to be trimmed to go over this. Obviously, they used to sit flat along the frame rail, and they can't anymore. But we're not gonna put the front sheet metal on just yet because it's so easy to work on the truck like this. So that'll probably be at the very end. We'll trim the fenders and put the front end back on. But I mean, if you're doing this at home and you've made it this far, you can figure that out on your own. You'll be fine. I believe in you. Anyways, music in this video is by Edmonton's James T. Kirks. My good friend Ted Wright said, hey man, use my song. It's great. So go, they don't really have any online presence, so other than a Facebook page. So go look up Ted at James T. Kirks on Facebook, and if you want an album, he'll sell you one. Check out lgspeedcustom.com if you want to support this channel and get yourself some LG Speed and Custom merch. T-shirts, stickers, hot rod parts, you name it, it's on there. Go check it out. And stay tuned for part 3 where we install a power brake kit in this and plumb it all up for the 4-wheel disc brakes. So make sure to subscribe and hit notifications for that. And we'll see you guys on the next video. Thanks for watching. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot, Jim put a sway bar on this the other day. So this sway bar came with the kit. Very straightforward to put on. Just drilled 4 holes in there. Bolted it on. Easy peasy. Anyways, thanks again for watching.